Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. I hope everyone is well, and I hope you enjoy listening to today's episode. Remember, you can find us at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. We have another interesting guest lined up for you today. Let's go and find out who it is. So, Michael Rivero is the host of What Really Happened radio show, broadcast from his home in Hawaii. It's been going for well over 20 years now, I believe. Formerly, Michael was involved with NASA, had skills in image processing, which he used in the animation field. Worked on films such as Star Trek, The Day After Tomorrow, and on visual effects on things such as Brainscan, Lost, and I believe Hawaii Five-0 too. Nowadays, Mike focuses more on his show, which covers diverse topics, including the JFK assassination, TWA, Flight 800, election fraud, 9/11, the economy, wars and politics surrounding countries such as Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Ukraine, Israel, and Syria. Michael, aloha, or as we say here in Thailand, Saudi Cup from the island of Koh Samui.
Aloha back from the island of Oahu.
Really nice to have you on our show. Welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Did I get that right, that you worked on Lost? Is that correct?
Yeah, I was a visual effects producer for 4 of the seasons, and I've been running my website, whatreallyhappened.com, for 20 years. I've been doing talk radio since 2007.
Great. Now, Lost was one of my favorite TV series. I wasn't totally happy with the ending, but then...
Join the club. Because they wrote themselves into a corner, and finally they said, all right, they've been dead all along, and that's the out that we can think of. And it was a little bit of a disappointment to those of us working on the show.
Yeah. I mean, it was full of mysteries and conspiracies, pretty much like the current world we live in. It's no surprise it had quite a following. Were you actually a fan of the show yourself?
I was during season 2, and then season 3, J.J. Abrams left the show to go off and work on Cloverfield, and it turned it over to a couple of producers who were very well-intentioned, but didn't really have a good grasp of what the whole storyline for the rest of the show was going to be. And part of the problem was that they had said it was only going to be a 4-season show, and then they said, well, it's popular, let's figure out a 5th season, and then let's figure out the final season. And that's when they just started trying to come up with things to keep the story going, and got themselves into this horrible corner where there really wasn't a good resolution to the story. We never found out what the Dharma Initiative was going to be about. And so they finally wound up where you've all been dead all this time, and that's why nothing has to make sense.
Yeah, that was a bit of a shame, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It looked like it would have been impossible to kind of find a satisfactory conclusion for, but you kind of hoped, a lot of people kind of hoped that they'd worked it out all along, but they went off track a bit, yeah.
Well, they did have, originally, when it was only going to be 4 seasons, they did actually have a complete storyline for the show, but they'd used it up, and so trying to extend it, they kind of got themselves a little bit, you'll pardon the expression, lost.
Yeah. Just before we started talking, you mentioned that you get up very early to check on the news as it comes out, and you come across as very well informed on your show. What are your main sources of news information, and what's your advice for people attempting to filter out fact from fiction in the news?
Well, I have a wide variety of sources. There are certain places I go to look for information. There's a large number of members of the website who are constantly sending me stories. The most important thing to understand right now is that corporate media and the government are trying to regain the high ground in the war for the minds of America and indeed of the world. They've really destroyed their own credibility in recent years. Latest polls are showing only 6% of Americans think the corporate media can be trusted. So since they can't all of a sudden overnight do anything that will make the public trust them again, their strategy is to try and discredit the independent media by planting nonsensical, bogus stories on them so they can say, see, they're no better than we are. And you really have to be very careful about that. I think a good example would be the recent events with Hillary Clinton, where they tried to put out the story that Hillary was dead. They put out all kinds of nonsense, that she'd been arrested, that she was in handcuffs, and so forth and so on. So you do have to be very, very cautious and figure out is what is being presented. Does it make actual sense as to what's going on? And most people, if they really apply themselves analytically, they're going to figure out the difference between what's real and what's propaganda.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to be careful not to fall in love with the conspiratorial angle and just, when some crazy story comes out, not just to jump on it and think it's true. Yeah, you definitely have to do a bit of fact checking. What motivates you to do your show, What Really Happened, which obviously goes against the official narrative? What motivates you to do that show?
Well, it's a long story, and I'll be very honest. Originally, it was a sense of outrage and indignation, and indeed a little bit of revenge, because back in 1994, I was working in Hollywood. I was working in visual effects. I had this very promising career and a brand new bride. And quite by accident, I stumbled across this photo that was leaked by the White House to Reuters News, showing the hand of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster with the gun with which he supposedly committed suicide. Now, you need to understand that my business is knowing what makes something look real and what will destroy that illusion of reality. And the instant I saw that picture, I said, this is a fake. This is staged. And I made a hard copy of the picture, and I took it in the next day to this shop in Hollywood I was doing a little bit of work at that shared the same building with CNN Hollywood. And on our lunch break, there was this little outdoor cafe that we all shared, and I was showing this picture to these other coworkers and pointing out all the problems with it. First and foremost, there wasn't a drop of blood anywhere on Vince Foster's white shirt sleeve or hand or anything, and that is simply not possible if you understand the physics of suicide by gunshot to the mouth. And I remember very clearly there were some people from CNN at the next table listening very, very closely. That night, we started getting the death threats. The very next day, this company that I'd been doing the work for fired me in the middle of a project, said, we don't need you anymore, you're gone. And my career in Hollywood was basically gone at that point. Nobody would talk to me. Nobody would go near me. And it was as effective a blacklisting as when the FBI destroyed the career of actress Jean Seberg back in the 1960s. But unlike Jean Seberg, I didn't get depressed and I wasn't driven to suicide. I got very, very angry. And since all of a sudden I had a lot of free time on my hands, I started digging in a little bit further. I found evidence within the FBI's own documentation that they had fraudulently manufactured the testimony in which Lisa Foster, Vince's wife, had identified the gun found with the body as belonging to her husband. And the reality was it couldn't. The gun that Vince Foster inherited from his father was a nickel-plated revolver. The gun found with the body was dark-blued steel. And the FBI's records made it clear. They showed her a nickel-plated gun and said it was the gun found with the body, even though the photographs put the lie to that. These days, as we look at what's going on with the FBI and the Clintons and the cover-ups of the email server, this is not going to be a shock to anybody. But back in 1994, most Americans were still very naive and trusting that the government would do the right thing. I certainly was. See something, say something. And I tried to go to my contacts in the corporate media and say, there's a story here. And they all said exactly the same thing. We know, we can't touch it. We'll be fired. And I began to realize the scale of the lying that was going on to the public from the government through the corporate media. And that kind of got me started. We wound up leaving Southern California. We lived for a while up in the Cascade Mountains in Washington State, basically to get away from all the threats that we were dealing with. And the more I learned about what was going on, the more I began to understand the issues went way beyond what had happened to me and my lovely wife, Claire. And we began to understand that we were dealing with a government that was just lying to the public about everything, that we were the most lied to people on the face of the earth. And these lies were being used to send our kids off to war, to loot and plunder our wealth, to cover up government mistakes like TW 800. And I just had this thing. I won't live with a government that lies to us. I'm going to have a truthful government, or I'll have no government at all. And I had set up the original version of my Truth website, and it was growing, and more stuff came out like TW 800. I went back and looked at the JFK assassination. And now, of course, it's just huge amounts of material on there, certainly about 9/11 and the crimes and corruptions of the Clintons. And basically, at this point, we're dealing with what I call the narcocracy. And to understand that, you need to go back and look at the history of prohibition in the United States, where those who were willing to deal in banned alcohol had enough money to literally buy their way to the highest levels of the U.S. government. That was the origin of the Kennedy family fortune, which allowed John F. Kennedy to become president. Robert F. Kennedy was on his way to being president when he was killed. Ted Kennedy probably would have run for the White House hadn't been for Chappaquiddick. Well, we're seeing the same exact thing going on now. And we have this ruling duopoly consisting of the Bush and Clinton families and their rise to power over our government, our nation, our lives, goes all the way back to the mid-1980s when former head of the CIA and then Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, who was Reagan's vice president, was running a little covert operation that was manufacturing and smuggling untraceable military weapons down to Nicaragua to arm the Contras against the Sandinistas. All of this was illegal under the Boland Amendment and the Logan Act, and because it was illegal, there was no government funding available. So Bush and the CIA were funding all of this with tons of cocaine that were being flown back along that same smuggling pipeline, and the U.S. end of that pipeline was at this little airport at Mena, Arkansas, under then Governor Bill Clinton. And Clinton was running protection on the airport, keeping people away from what was going on, and he set up the CIA's money laundry, which consisted of banks like Madison Guaranty, land flip deals like Whitewater, Castle Grande, and Flowerwood, and the final payouts came out through an Arkansas state agency called the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, which was put together by Webb Hubbell and signed into law by Governor Bill Clinton. And that was the machine where the cocaine would be sold to our kids, and the money would come on in. It would go through all these little cutouts, and then it would surface inside the Arkansas Development Finance Authority as state economic stimulus checks. Technically loans, but none of them were ever repaid. And everybody along the way was making huge, huge amounts of money. And if you remember Bill Clinton's first run at the White House, there was a lot of head-scratching going on how much of his campaign fundraising seemed to involve large amounts of cash from untraceable sources. There was a huge amount of cash came in that listed the address of the Democratic National Committee as the donor's address, which is illegal. And so we're seeing a repeat of the corruption of contraband from Prohibition to the present day. And the goal of the Clinton and Bush family was to set up this duopoly of two dynastic ruling families who would hand the White House off back and forth down through the ages to maintain the illusion that we still had a choice from Clinton to Bush to Bush to Clinton to Clinton to Bush. And this election was actually supposed to be between Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, so it didn't matter what the voters did, the narcocracy would hang on to power. But Jeb Bush could never connect with the voters. He couldn't get rid of that deer in the headlight look. And Donald Trump got in on the inside of the nomination, and you can see just how desperate the entire establishment, which is steeped in all of this illicit drug running, how terrified they are that if he gets the White House and finds out what's been going on, if he gets the White House and he makes Trey Gowdy the Attorney General, we're going to see this narcocracy's talons, if you will, start to be pried loose from the throat of the nation. And they are very, very much afraid of that.
Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think they're going to let Trump get into that kind of position?
I am fully expecting that there will be a serious assassination attempt against him. A lot of people were wondering if Hillary was going to drop out. The latest word we're getting is that she will return to the campaign trail tomorrow, which right there tells us whatever it was that happened on Sunday wasn't pneumonia, because you don't get over pneumonia after 3 days. They may even be desperate enough to use her body double, Teresa Barnwell, who was the second Hillary that appeared just a couple of hours after Hillary's whatever it was, seizure, stroke, there at the 9/11 memorial. So they might try and pull a Dave, if you remember that movie with Kevin Kline. But if Hillary is forced to drop out, if she has another major medical event where people can see it, Bernie Sanders technically should be given the nomination because he came in with the second largest number of votes. But what I'm hearing is the DNC is going to shove Bernie out and put Joe Biden in because he's an excellent debater, and they are very much afraid of the upcoming debates.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned anger can be a great motivator. I know that's true. It helps me with my workouts at the gym.
Yes.
You also talked about bogus stories, and I wondered what you thought of that boy in the ambulance story. Do you think that was staged?
I'm sorry, the boy in the ambulance story.
There was that picture that kind of went viral of the little boy in Syria that was dragged out from the rubble.
Oh, yeah, that from a while back. Yeah, that one was staged, and I think the reason we know that one was staged is the story was that there had just been this huge bombing, and in the background of the boy, we see something like 15 first responders, and they're not doing anything. They're not digging through the rubble. They're not putting out fires. They're just standing there like costumed extras.
Yeah, it definitely did seem a bit odd.
Let me give you a little guideline here. If you want to know if you're being lied to in a particular story, look for what should be there and isn't. A good example of that would be back when they were trying to insist that Bashar al-Assad had used sarin gas on his own people in Syria, on his own Alawite supporters, literally in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived. What should be there and is missing is a motive for Assad to do something that's stupid. And there never was one. And eventually the UN chemical weapons inspectors said, no, it wasn't Assad. It was being done by the U.S.-backed rebels and blamed on Assad. But look to see, go down the list and say, if what they're saying is true, we should expect to see X, Y, Z. And if X, Y, Z isn't there, then you're being fed another line of propaganda.
Yeah, good advice. I'm doing Thai boxing here in Thailand, and occasionally when I'm doing sparring, you sometimes get a fighter who bends and weaves and ducks and seems to wriggle out of everything. That kind of reminds me of Hillary Clinton, who must give you plenty of fuel for your show. How does she seem to wriggle out of every accusation against her? It seems unbelievable the amount of accusations against her with her emails and the Clinton Foundation. Do you think that investigation is going to turn anything up?
It probably will, but whether anything will be done, we don't know. I mean, we just saw FBI Director James Comey rattle off a list of Title 18 violations Hillary Clinton had committed, then say, well, we're not going to recommend charges, and Loretta Lynch said we're not going to recommend charges. And to understand why that happened, and this is a good illustration of what I mean by the narcocracy. A while back, there was a bank, HSBC, that got caught laundering drug money, and they got a sweetheart deal from the U.S. Attorney for New York for a deferred prosecution, meaning it was never going to go to trial, nobody was going to go to jail, and all it cost them was this wrist slap fine. Now, the U.S. Attorney for New York who gave this drug money laundering bank this sweetheart deal was Loretta Lynch, who was rewarded with promotion to U.S. Attorney General. On the board of HSBC while all this money laundering was going on was James Comey, who's now head of the FBI. And it's important to remember, James Comey has no prior law enforcement experience. He's never been a cop. He's never been an investigator. He's always been a money man. And so this is what I mean by the drug money corruption that is poisoning our government and our nation. And
do you think there was any threats by Bill Clinton to Loretta Lynch in that plane meeting?
There could have been, or Bill Clinton would have just reminded Loretta Lynch of her exposure if Hillary's scandals come on out. See, the Clintons have gotten away with so much. If it were ever all to come on out, it could bring down the entire government. And I'll give you one example, something that I think needs to be asked. We know that Hillary Clinton was running this private email server with weaker security than Ashley Madison. On it were parked some of the nation's darkest secrets. We now know, because of the congressional investigation, that the man who was managing her server, on which was parked classified information, never held a security clearance. Now, you couple that with the charitable foundation, and it raises a question, because back in 1996, there was another Clinton scandal called Chinagate. Bill Clinton, as president, was authorizing the sale of very sensitive U.S. technology to China over the objections of the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies, and at the same time, Chinese money was pouring into his re-election campaign, funneled through Chinese American citizens to make it look like it was legal. But Congress was investigating, and they found out that this money was actually originating with Chinese businessmen like Ng Lap Seng and Chinese intelligence agencies. And so it's reasonable to ask if Hillary Clinton was replaying that same scam, selling secrets to foreign governments, delivering them through her weak email server, and using the Clinton Foundation to collect and launder the payments and make it all look above board. And I'll tell you another piece of information that makes it look like this is an issue that has to be looked at. And it has to do with Chinese billionaire Ng Lap Seng, who was the source of money pouring into Bill Clinton's campaign through Charlie Tree. And Ng Lap Seng refused to cooperate with the investigation, but about a year ago, he got arrested on an unrelated bribery charge and has gone to trial in New York. His co-defendant was a man named John Ash, who said he was ready to testify about the links between Ng Lap Seng and the Clintons. But before he could go to court and testify, he died under very suspicious circumstances. Originally, it was reported as a heart attack, and then word got out that his throat had been crushed, and so they changed the story to he accidentally dropped a barbell on his own throat, which is actually a plot line from the TV series Columbo back in the 70s. And people who've got this information on the Clintons, they do meet untimely ends. But the reality is that if, in fact, Hillary was selling secrets to foreign interests with her server, it's a scandal of such magnitude it could bring the whole government down. And in that case, even Hillary's worst enemies are going to be working to keep that secret under wraps just so that they can keep their own job and wealth and privilege and power going.
Rather than all this corruption and crime that the Clintons are involved with, do you think it is going to be the health issue that actually brings Hillary's campaign to a halt?
It's certainly a major issue, but Congress is definitely poring over that email server issue. They've already exposed the fact that there's a cover-up going on there because Brian Pagliano has an immunity deal, and he's still refusing to testify. He defied a congressional subpoena. And if it's just an ordinary email server, why all the secrecy?
Indeed, indeed. And why do you think people still vote for these obvious liars who are mixed up in this corruption? Why do you think you still get these people that follow Hillary Clinton and just kind of hang on her every word? They seem to be, almost brainwashed, really.
Well, a lot of them are hired. That's one of the things that has come on out from the latest DNC email dump from Guccifer 2, is that Hillary's rallies are all staged managed. They're certainly a lot smaller than Donald Trump's. And they basically have crowds that are sent in to pose in front of Hillary and clap their hands. We don't really know what Hillary's support is. We do know there was massive fraud during the primary season. There are dozens of lawsuits already in the court system challenging the legitimacy of Hillary's primary win. Hillary's lawyers are all out there saying, well, you've got to delay this until after the election because it might unfairly prejudice the voters against Hillary Clinton. And, of course, election fraud is something that we have a right to know. And certainly with these electronic machines, Hillary could steal the election. Even Michael Savage is out there saying the Democrats are going to steal the national election the way they stole the primaries away from Bernie Sanders. There have been studies that show if you take away the known fraud that took place during the primary seasons, Bernie Sanders would have won the nomination. And so we may have little more than a manufactured illusion of support for Hillary Clinton. It's a product of the corporate media that is desperate to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. It's a product of manipulation of the electronic voting machines. And right now we've got Hillary's lawyers are traveling all over the United States trying to strike down laws requiring ID to vote in this country. Their excuse is it's racist, it discriminates against minorities. That's nonsense. You have to show an ID to buy a bottle of wine. Is that racist or discriminatory? You have to show a license to drive a car. Is that racist or discriminatory? No, it isn't. The goal here is to allow people to vote multiple times under multiple identities using stolen registrations, and to allow the illegal immigrants to vote as well, because Hillary is literally willing to barter away our nation to these illegal citizens in exchange for the White House. And that, to me, is a major crime, because the United States of America is not the property of the U.S. government. It's not the property of Hillary Clinton. We, the people, built this nation with our hands generation after generation with the expectation that we would leave our accomplishment to the next generation of Americans. And Hillary Clinton is literally trying to steal our legacy and barter it off to these illegal immigrants and refugees in exchange for their votes.
Just time for a quick break in the middle of today's show, so you can go and make a quick cup of tea maybe. I'm just going to tell you a bit about the show. Hello, I'm Scott, host of Truth Sentinel. We do weekly podcast shows covering topics connected to psychology, philosophy, political corruption, conspiracies, mysteries, world events, paranormal, and scientific advancements. Recent guests have been Sean Stone, son of Oliver Stone, and author L.A. Marzulli. Our episodes are recorded from diverse locations such as the UK, Ukraine, Israel, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Vietnam, and Thailand. Find us on YouTube and also listen to us on the networks. Feel free to make a donation or buy a t-shirt, which gives us a small donation too. Use the code TRUTH1 for a 10% discount. Thanks for listening. I also wanted to talk to you about some up-and-coming guests that we're going to be having on. We've got Jasvinder Singera coming back to chat to us. Regular listeners will remember her from her chat about honour killings and forced marriages. She campaigns with a charity called Karma Nirvana. And she's got some very interesting stories to tell, and she can give a very good insight into what honour killings are all about and talk about the work she does with her organisation to stop forced marriages. As I've been mentioning for a while, we also have Luke Reinhardt, also known as the Dice Man. He wrote the book in the 1970s that on the front cover says, "This book will change your life." And for some people, maybe it did. It gets people to live a more random life, and we're going to be talking about the philosophy behind that, and about his new book, Invasion, which covers a lot of the topics that we talk about on this show. Really looking forward to that chat. Anyway, let's get back to today's episode with Michael Rivero. And if there was any election fraud going on and people felt that something untoward had happened, do you think they would take to the streets and protest?
They might. There are a lot of writers out there saying that if Hillary wins the election, everybody's going to know it was election fraud, and it could trigger bloodshed in the streets of America. I'd personally like to avoid that, but I keep going back to the statement made by President John F. Kennedy. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And I don't want to see that, but I think this nation being kept in the clutches of the Clinton-Bush duopoly will be the end of the nation as we know it. Hillary's already out there saying she's going to find some way to shut down independent media, and only government-approved news will be allowed out. She wants to take away the Second Amendment and guns. She's already out there basically showing that she is going to be a tyrant and a dictator if she can get her hands on that White House.
And on the same subject as protest and activism, these days it's quite carefully organised and people are allowed to protest but only in designated areas. And if they don't, they can get arrested and then they can be seen as the troublemakers. Where do you think the line should be drawn for protesting against the government?
Well, the First Amendment basically says it all. We all have a right to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. We are already seeing a legal pushback against this idea of a free speech zone, saying it's an infringement. When you set up a cage over here where nobody can hear anybody and you say, go in there and say what you want to say, that's clearly an infringement of our First Amendment rights. And there's been a great deal of progress to undoing that, especially in our nation's universities, because free speech is our right, and we have to protect that. And that gives us a right to stand anywhere that is public property and voice our grievances to the government. And the government doesn't want to listen, which is why they're trying all this nonsense about free speech zones. But it's our duty to make them listen.
And of course, sometimes there's consequences to some of the things you say, like with Edward Snowden. He's asking Obama to pardon him so that he can come back to the US. Do you think that will happen?
Absolutely not. We live in an upside-down society where law-abiding citizens and whistleblowers are punished fiercely, and the guilty are protected. If you look at the problems with civil forfeiture, the American people are being plundered. The police are stealing more than the burglars, robbers, and muggers put together. The police are certainly murdering more innocent Americans than all the mass shooters and the terrorists put together. And yet we look at Hillary Clinton, even when they admit she has committed felony violations of Title 18, well, you know, we're not going to recommend charges.
Yeah, that's not right. I wanted to change subject totally, really. I noticed you talk about TWA Flight 800, MH370 and MH17, and we've talked about that a lot on our show. And I wondered if you ever arrived at a conclusion with MH370. I mean, do you think it was shot down, perhaps?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was a report. Apparently, there was an oil platform right where the transponder signal ended. But the work crews only rotate out like once a month. And so it was like a few weeks after MH370 disappeared when the workers on the platform came on out, and they said they had seen the plane struck by a missile, which appeared to be coming out from the area of a joint U.S.-Thai naval exercise. And, of course, it's not the first time the U.S. government has shot down a passenger jet by mistake. The USS Vincennes shot down that Iranian Airbus by accident. The Aegis CEC system shot down TWA 800 by accident, and it does happen. And if they think they can get away with it, they'll keep it a secret and keep it covered up. That was very hard to do, obviously, off the coast of Long Island, and certainly the Iranians weren't going to go along with the cover-up of the USS Vincennes. But the United Nations acknowledges that there have been 26 known incidents where passenger jets have been accidentally shot down during military exercises. Most of them remain classified. We don't know who they are. It's suspected that one of the Alitalia flights and one of the Aer Lingus flights were both victims of missiles fired as part of drills. It does happen, unfortunately.
It does indeed, and it was quite strange when the second Malaysian plane did get shot down. Just a matter of months later. Do you think there was any connection between the two planes at all?
No, I don't. It was just bad luck for Malaysia here. And, of course, the one that was shot down over Ukraine, I have a different theory about that one. What I think happened there is Vladimir Putin was returning to Russia after a 6-day tour to South America. And Vladimir Putin's presidential jet, which is nowhere near as grandiose as Air Force One, is a converted passenger airliner, and it's painted the same colors as the Malaysian Airlines livery. And I think Poroshenko sent a fighter up to try and shoot down Putin's jet, and the fighter hit the wrong airplane by mistake, because there is a story from an airport worker who said that he'd seen these Ukrainian fighters take off, and when they came back, the rails on one of them were empty, and the pilot was clearly shook and kept saying, "We hit the wrong plane, we hit the wrong plane." So I think that's what that was all about.
That sounds like a good theory anyway, yeah. They certainly do look similar. I had a look at the two planes. They're definitely very similar colours anyway. Putin's plane looks a bit fatter, but apart from that, they're quite similar.
Yeah, but from a distance, and especially when you realize, in the heat of the moment where you're up there, he probably relied on the color rather than the shape of the aircraft at a distance and just opened fire. And he hit the wrong plane.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Iranian plane that got shot down before, which I don't think's ever been officially acknowledged as fact, but there was definitely compensation given by the US. Yeah.
No, the U.S. acknowledged the shoot down of the Iranian Airbus. They tried to come up with all kinds of excuses why it wasn't their fault, but in the end, it turned out that there was a software bug in the Aegis battle management computer system. And by accident, because of this software glitch, it assigned the same target identifier number to two aircraft it was tracking. One was the Iranian Airbus, and the other one was an Iranian F-14 that was on a training mission in the distance. And the computers, trying to make sense of all of this, merged them together and created a false target of an attacking F-14. And the captain, without checking what they were really looking at, activated the system, and it shot down the Iranian Airbus. The same thing appears to have been the case with TW-800, which occurred during a test of the next generation Aegis system, the Aegis CEC. Basically what appears to have happened is, first of all, TW-800 was flying a lot lower than it should have been. They'd been kept low by air traffic control because there was another airplane descending into Rhode Island above them. And a test drone was sent into the exercise area, which was active at the time. And the Aegis CEC system painted it and launched a missile to intercept it. And my theory is that in the distance, at the same time the missile went active, TW-800 flew into the radar beam, and the missile saw two returns with the correct code identifier and turned and locked on the larger one, flew out of the active warning zone and killed TW-800.
And I remember that when that happened, there was people appeared, witnesses on the news saying, I saw a missile come up from the sea, and they were very, very quickly disappeared, and you didn't hear much more about them again.
Oh, the official U.S. government explanation for all those hundreds and hundreds of people on Long Island who saw a rocket, oh, they're all drunk. You can't, those Long Islanders, they're always tanked. You can't listen to them. It was pretty absurd. Yeah,
and there was, as you say, there was witnesses with MH370 in various places, which have spawned theories.
Well, I have family who lives in that part of the country, and they were seeing the missile not just on Long Island, but all the way up the coast.
Right, yeah. Does seem like the likely explanation. We talked about Iran with this plane. Now, what about your views on the recent Iran nuclear deal? Do you think that's going to basically any perceived threat from Iran is over now?
Well, there never really was a threat from Iran. You need to remember back in 2003, 2005, General Wesley Clark blew the lid off the fact that the U.S. government had a plan to conquer all of the Middle East oil nations in order to force them to always trade their oil only for the U.S. dollar. And they had this list of 8 nations they were going to take out, ending with Iran in 2008, which obviously they're off the schedule. So Iran was never really a threat. The fact of the matter is Iran has not initiated a war of conquest in over 200 years. It's just not their nature. But after all this, Saddam has nuclear weapons, Assad has sarin gas, and all these other lies we've been told, obviously we look at this talk about an Iranian threat, or for that matter, a Russian threat, and realize It's just more propaganda to get us convinced that the inevitable coming war is necessary and good, and we shouldn't be upset about our kids being blown to bloody bits in it. But Iran is not the threat. They're trying to manufacture one. They may even have a false flag like 9/11 again to try and restart the war fever. And another reason that the establishment is so afraid of Donald Trump is because he's already indicated if he wins the White House, he wants to go back to being friends with Russia and China. Peace through commerce. Let's trade. Let's just make a little business here. And you need to understand that the war agenda against Russia and China is all about protecting the U.S. dollar's hegemonic domination of the global economy. Because going back to the end of World War II, there was the Bretton Woods Agreement where all the nations agreed to go through the dollar for cross-border trade and banking. Lately, a lot of countries are moving away from that, and they're turning toward the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan as much more trustworthy and stable currencies. Now, this is a huge loss to America's financial system because nobody's coming to the U.S. to borrow U.S. dollars at interest. Nobody is coming to deliver us manufactured goods and agricultural produce in exchange for boxes of ink and paper. And so without that U.S. dollar being the global trade and banking currency, the U.S. economy is going to implode. Nobody wants our GMO. Nobody wants our manufactured goods. They don't have anything else. And that's why they're so desperate to get a war with Russia and China going. It's really a war between the dollar and the ruble and the yuan. And my concern is that if they are convinced Donald Trump is actually going to win the White House, they may start the war by the end of this year and stick him with it, the way Herbert Hoover was stuck with the Depression of the 1930s.
I agree. I agree with everything you just said there, basically. Iran, a lot of people forget that, it was Israel, the US, and other Western powers that helped start Iran's nuclear program in the first place. And it was only the 1979 revolution that kind of changed things. And I wondered whether you think the dollar is, you talked about the economy as well. Do you think the dollar is going to collapse at some point?
I think it already is. It's a slow motion collapse. And I think we're already seeing it when you start and look at the price of goods in the store, which are going up rapidly, and that's because most of the products that you find in the stores of America are still being imported from other countries. And because of the rapidly changing exchange rate, the U.S. dollar is buying less and less of those goods, so the prices go up.
And you alluded to the fact that you think the next world war is coming, or some people might even say it's already kind of started in a way. I do think that they would need to get public opinion behind them, and I'm talking about the UK now. I don't think public opinion is behind them, and probably in the US too. It would have to be something pretty big. Do you think it's going to be another false flag or another accusations of chemical weapons? How do you think they're going to actually engineer a full-scale war for the next one?
It's going to have to be a false flag. Words aren't carrying any weight anymore. Nobody's listening to this guy has nuclear weapons or that guy has sarin gas. It's going to have to be a real event, and it's going to have to be so beyond crashing airplanes into buildings that the shock value will overwhelm people's tendency to say, wait a minute, let's think this through. And we could be talking about a nuclear weapon set off someplace important. But we know that wars are always started with some kind of a fraud or a deception. The Spanish-American War was started with this lie about a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. We got into Vietnam over the lie about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. We got into World War I with this lie that the Lusitania wasn't smuggling weapons to Great Britain. We got into World War II with the lie that Pearl Harbor was a complete and total surprise by those dastardly Japanese. We got into Iraq with that lie about nuclear weapons. All wars are started with lies because without one, the people aren't going to go along with the war. And so the government that wants to start a war has to do something that convinces the ordinary people that war is really the only possible choice for the next step.
Yeah, I totally agree with you again. I think a nuclear detonation would be the kind of big thing that you're talking about. So unfortunately, that could be what they might have planned anyway, amongst other things.
Or even more than one.
Yeah. You also did some work on the day after tomorrow, which was like a natural disaster rather than a kind of man-made war or something to end the world. Do you think there's any possibility that there's going to be any more natural disasters? Do you think the world eventually is going to end due to mankind destroying itself, or a natural disaster?
Well, mankind only has the power to destroy himself. I'm sure the world will continue on quite well because it certainly got along quite well before human activity. The events in Day After Tomorrow are highly fictionalized. I had some very entertaining debates with the film's producers over the scientific inaccuracies that were in there. But the reality is climate on Earth is primarily dominated by solar activity, which is now at a record low. We're entering a period for the next 2 decades of reduced solar output. And the other thing that controls climate on Earth is the Earth's orbit, which oscillates from circular to elliptical and back to circular. And when it's elliptical, the Earth spends more time at the far end of the orbit away from the sun, Kepler's laws of orbital motions, and we get the ice ages. Then as the orbit becomes more circular, the Earth spends more time closer to the sun, and we get the interglacials, which is what we're in right now. So until Al Gore and his people can put a thermostat on the sun or actually shift the Earth in its orbit, there isn't a thing they can do to stop climate change.
And it might be nice to watch Al Gore try and put a thermostat on the sun as well.
Down on the Big Island, Kilauea is getting ready for a major eruption down there, and I can almost imagine Al Gore running up there with a giant cork and a hammer to pound it on in there to keep those greenhouse gases from getting on out.
I was listening to a show you did some time ago, and you were talking about Fukushima. I used to live near Fukushima, well, virtually in Fukushima. But how are the radiation levels over there in the States? Is there any evidence that there has been a cover-up, or are there at reasonable rates at the moment?
Well, I can't say for the mainland here. We have radiation meters in our home. Unfortunately, they're not set up to detect alpha. We can't afford one of those units. There were some bursts of intense activity following Fukushima, but it's steadied on down. The primary concern, though, isn't airborne nucleotides or even in the ocean. It's the contamination of the food chain, because a fish that becomes contaminated with nuclear material off the coast of Fukushima is still just as contaminated when they're swimming off the coast of South America. And so it's an area of tremendous concern for our various sushi restaurants. They're making a point of trying to source their fish from areas that are free from the radiation. But at some point, it's going to, basically fill the entire Pacific Basin and the Atlantic. If you have a mass spectrometer, you can take samples. There's still radioactive material from those Pacific Ocean nuclear tests back in the 1940s and 1950s is still floating around in the air out here.
Well, I mean, that's something that a lot of people don't talk about, the nuclear tests. There's that video you can see on YouTube if you type in all the nuclear tests from 1945 onwards. It's quite shocking, really. It makes you think that all of this radiation's going up into the atmosphere. Why has nobody looked at that as a possible cause for cancer worldwide,
Well, because then the government would be liable for all those cancer deaths, and they don't want to do that. There was a famous incident where the U.S. government, during its weapons development program, set off a tactical nuclear weapon in the desert of Nevada, and they had a bunch of soldiers walk into the aftermath as a test of how the Army could exploit a breach in the enemy lines created with a tactical nuclear weapon. And, of course, everybody who was in that test wound up with cancer and leukemia for the rest of their lives, and the government denied any and all responsibility. These things happen when you're in the Army, and they basically just let these guys rot away, didn't give them any support at all.
Yeah, it's just another example of some of the terrible things the government's done to us over the years, well, to the military and to, with the MK Ultra experiments as well, with people off the streets. Anyway, unfortunately, we're running out of time today, but I wondered what you've got lined up for today's show, which you'll be doing later, I presume.
Well, I'm going to be starting in about an hour here. We're going to be talking about Hillary Clinton's health issues. We're going to be spending a lot of time on the new congressional investigation into her email scandal. We're going to be talking about how Congress has now subpoenaed the FBI's entire case file of their investigation into the email scandal, which could open up James Comey to an obstruction charge. And even now, faced with a congressional subpoena, the FBI is there saying, you don't really need to look at this stuff. So, again, there's obviously a cover-up going there. And Richard Nixon, when he was dealing with his self-created nightmare, basically came on out and said, it's not the crime that does you in, it is that cover-up. And that is, I think, about to be proven again.
Right, that sounds like a good show you've got lined up as well. Is that 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. your Central Time?
Yeah, it's 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Central Time at republicbroadcasting.org, or you can go to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and there are listen and video links there.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to thank you for coming and talking to us today, Michael. It's been really interesting, and as usual, you're a fountain of information.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Take it easy. Have a good day.
Same to you.
Just got a couple of minutes left at the end of today's show, so I'll have a quick chat with you. I just spotted an article in the news, actually, that might be worth talking about. This is the story of a terminally ill 17-year-old who's become the first minor young person to be helped to die in Belgium since age restrictions on euthanasia requests were removed 2 years ago. The head of the Federal Euthanasia Commission said the teenager was suffering unbearable physical pain, and Belgium is one of the only countries that allows minors of any age to choose euthanasia. I wondered what you thought about that. Do you think if someone's suffering from a terminal illness and is in pain, they should be allowed the right to die? I think I do, certainly in certain situations, and really I think anyone has a choice over their own life. I think obviously you need to be careful about making sure someone is in their right mind to make that decision. But if someone's in unbearable pain, then whose right is it for anyone else to tell them that you must live? But those are just my thoughts without sort of delving too much into the story. I wondered what you think. Why don't you go to our website and let us know what you think in our chat room, or leave a voicemail, www.truthsentinel.co.uk, and find us on YouTube, Truth Sentinel with Scott. We've got 2 channels. Subscribe to both. And I thought I'd leave you with a message from Michael Stipe, who had something to say about Chelsea Manning, who has been treated like a war criminal, when in fact, as most people know, Chelsea Manning, originally called Bradley Manning, was the person responsible for sharing the video, I think called Collateral Murder, which shows the murder of some reporters in Iraq, which was they tried to cover up basically. This was released by WikiLeaks via Bradley Manning, and now Bradley Manning faces a ridiculous amount of time behind bars and is being currently punished for attempting suicide. I mean, who would ever talk about punishing someone for attempting suicide? It's ridiculous. This is disgusting. Let's hear what Michael Stipe has to say about this. Michael Stipe, for those of you who don't know, was in the very popular group REM. Here's what he had to say about Chelsea Manning.
I'm Michael Stipe. I'd like to give you an update on imprisoned soldier Chelsea Manning. Chelsea has ended her hunger strike because the Army has agreed to move forward with giving her medical care that she needs. Unfortunately, Chelsea can't celebrate quite yet because in just a few days, on September 20th, she will face a disciplinary board for her suicide attempt last July. The prison is threatening to punish her with indefinite solitary confinement, something the UN has condemned as a form of torture. This is rather ironic since it was the prison's mistreatment of Chelsea that led to her suicide attempt in the first place. Chelsea needs us now more than ever. Please sign the petition at freechelsea.com and share this right now so everyone knows what's really going on. Thank you.
I personally think that is a message worth sharing. Talking of sharing, please share our videos on YouTube as well so that they get out to as many people as possible. We really appreciate you doing that. As ever, if you've got anything you really want to talk about and you want to contact me personally, just write to scottsentinel9@gmail.com. That's scottsentinel9@gmail.com. If, for example, you want to advertise something, we can talk about that for sure. It has to be ethical and based, or at least related to the topics we cover in our show in some way. Also, if there is a topic you want us to talk about or a guest you want to recommend, contact us about that as well. And also, please, if you have a chance, make a donation or share our videos or buy a t-shirt from www.truthtshirts.com and use the code TRUTH1 so we get a small donation from them. That's it for today. Hope you have a good week, and thanks for listening. Goodbye.